Hey everyone, it's Emma. In video 3, we got to work on actual reporting and using public documents. In video 4, it's time for us to complement paper with people. That's right, we're getting you your own sources, anonymous and otherwise. The first place to start is with the work you've already done. Your research and your public documents are chock full of names. If they've been willing to talk to other reporters, there's a decent chance they'll speak with you too. It's important to keep in mind that just because you have a source doesn't mean they're a good source. Are they in a position to know what they're talking about? How so, and how do you know? If they're telling you something you can't verify on your own, do you have a second source who can confirm it? And here's the catch, how does source number 2 know it's true? Is it possible they heard it from source 1? In that case, you don't have two sources, you have one source who blabs a lot. So when you can't verify something on your own, make sure your sources have independent ways of knowing what they're telling you. Don't be afraid to push your sources either. They might have agendas of their own and might not want you to know they're speculating or BSing you. Same thing when you ask them about themselves. It's not just name, title, and organization. Do they have any conflicts of interest? Friends or family involved? A stake in the business? Property owner? Anything that might cause people to doubt them. If you explain your need for credibility and accuracy, a source with integrity will help you. You don't want the other kind of source. And also pay attention to the power dynamics in the story you're doing. Is the institution dominated by straight white dudes? Your story should reveal that kind of inequity, not reflect it. Find knowledgeable sources among groups that have been disenfranchised by the institutions you're covering. They know stuff. And once you've got a good source, or two, you can ask them to tell other possible sources to contact you, and so on, and so on, and so on. And when they do contact you, be ready to record what they say. There are lots of different ways to record what your source tells you. You can communicate by text or email and use their messages as your record of what they say. You can transcribe it by hand or by typing. Remember, if you didn't write down exactly what they said, no quote marks for you, just paraphrasing. Or you can tape them, video or audio, as long as you know what the law says about getting their consent wherever they are. And if you're on the phone across state lines, make sure you know the laws in both states before you record someone without their consent. That helps you by staving off legal problems later. And there are also important ways you should consider helping your sources. The more power your source has, the less help you're obliged to give them. Here's what I mean. When you're looking to quote someone by name or get them on camera, you should always identify yourself by name as a journalist first. There are exceptions, but we're not getting into undercover stuff here. After that, politicians and powerful officials are fair game. If the local power company president tells you he's planning to block out the sun and then tells you, of course that's off the record, well, did you agree it was off the record? Remember, it's your record. No one gets to tell you it's off the record. You decide. On the other hand, your average citizen doesn't know those rules, and they might not understand just what they're agreeing to when they say you can use their name. How much you explain that to them is up to you. What benefit do you get by naming them? What benefit does society get? How much could they be hurt by naming them? Suppose a wounded accident victim tells you it was their fault. Are they thinking straight when they agree to be quoted? Do they understand what they're risking? These are the kinds of cost-benefit questions you will have to do, and there are dangers for you too in how you answer them. For instance, what if you want this source to talk to you again? Will they if you name them? And they get in trouble for it? If you protect their identity because you want them to keep talking to you, welcome to the slippery slope towards access journalism. What is access journalism? It's when your journalism relies on maintaining access to people in power, which rarely happens unless they like what you're reporting. And if the people in power like what you're reporting, why bother? How do you know you're practicing access journalism? If you're holding back on your questions or on what you report because you're afraid a source won't talk to you, congratulations, you're the mainstream media. The best reporters get people in power to talk to them precisely because their reporting is so good. People in power recognize that they'd better talk if they want their side of the story reflected in the story. And if you just want to be nice to your sources because they give you good tips, well, you can be sure those tips benefit them. And the industry that publishes information helping people in power isn't journalism. It's marketing. The good news is there's a cool kind of access journalism. Not access to power, access to whistleblowers. If you stomp around your beat well enough and long enough, you'll soon blaze a trail to people who have inside information. Some of them will even come to you. Now, you might meet some of them on a perfectly benign story. Say you're doing a fun little features piece on the local zoo and you interview the elephant keeper all about the tricks Jumbo can do. Well, if that zookeeper calls you the next week and says, by the way, Jumbo's really lonely and they won't give us money to obtain a mate, even if you give them anonymity, you still risk exposing them since you just quoted them by name last week. So try not to rely publicly on people who might want to help you privately, or at least try to put some distance in there. And also ask yourself, why are you giving your source anonymity in the first place? Anonymity is great for protecting people who want to help the public by revealing important information without getting punished for it, fired, prosecuted, or threatened with violence. But most anonymous sources, far too many, just don't want to be criticized. In other words, they don't want the public to be able to hold them accountable. You see this a lot in political reporting, when the public may get the knowledge of what they're saying, but is denied the knowledge of who's saying it, which might be just as or more important. It's not always a good trade-off. So you don't have to do this, but it's a good practice when you do grant anonymity to ask why your source wants it and explain that to the audience. And an important thing to keep in mind is that anonymity isn't black and white. Suppose a source says, I want to be off the record, or I want this to be on background, or deep background, or not for attribution. What does that mean? More importantly, what do they think it means? There are official definitions for these cool-sounding terms, but the best thing to do is not use them. Instead, be specific about what you both mean. If your audience should know that they have a reason to be taken seriously or a reason to doubt them, you should fight to include that in how you attribute the quotation. So instead of just calling them a source, you might say a source in the Democratic Party familiar with the campaign. Just make sure you and your source are both cool with it beforehand. Your sources should rarely be surprised by what you write, at least the stuff that they told you. If you find that they often are, you should question whether you're being upfront with them. Everyone, no matter how you attribute them, should have the opportunity to respond to what you're going to be saying about them before you say it publicly. That means even if you think the mayor won't talk to you, you give their office a reasonable time to respond. And anytime someone does talk to you, especially for the first time, it's a good idea to ask whether you can get back to them if you have follow-up questions, because you probably will. And you'll probably think of some as you start writing your story, which is what we're going to tackle next. So watch the next video in the playlist called Writing and Editing. It's the most fearsome journalistic adversary of all, the blank page.